This is Investigative Poetics, Episode 3, The Truth About an Educator. I keep going back into the public record, reading and rereading the same stories, hoping to find something new. It's hard to look straight into the disaster, and harder still to look away. I study the articles dated 12, 13, 14 years ago. There is my father's face on the screen. I study the compendium of his crimes and memorize his misdeeds. My mind skips backwards and forwards through time, piecing the narrative together, but often when I sit to write, I end up scrolling or staring off into space. Thus, days pass in a monolith of half-done deeds. I languish in the abyss of inaction. Then, just when I'm ready to surrender and let it all go, something appears to crystallize the process, and suddenly the story is writing itself. That's how I felt when I came across an opinion piece penned by a parent whose children had attended my father's schools and published just 5 days after his suicide. I couldn't believe I'd never seen it before. Unlike the investigative reports, which are clear, factual, and plot-heavy, this piece reads like a script, ambivalent and character-driven, alive with my father's presence and magnetism. Opinion: The Truth About an Educator. Brian Gardner, charter school founder, made room for a boy with a disability, by Patrick P. McNally, published May 18th, 2009. The last words Brian Gardner said to me are still ringing in my ears. It was last year during a meeting with parents who wanted answers about allegations of financial misconduct by Gardner, the founder and former CEO of Philadelphia Academy Charter School in the Northeast, and his hand-picked successor, Kevin O'Shea. I was one of the parents who stood up and expressed disappointment in Gardner, a man I considered honorable. Afterward, Gardner thanked me for my remarks. I hope that when everything comes out, you'll write the truth, he told me, firmly shaking my hand. Now, some of that truth will never be told. Facing the possibility of federal indictment as the result of a far-reaching investigation, Gardner was found dead Wednesday of an apparent suicide. It was a tragic end for a man who, 18 months ago, was considered a pioneer in charter schools and special education. I hope that when everything comes out, you'll write the truth. This does sound like my father. I too hear his voice. A few years before he pulled the trigger, my father gave me a sterling silver fountain pen. "You are a great writer, Neen," he said as I opened the box. And he said it as if he meant it, great with a capital G. But his words left me feeling tired and small. I shrank from his blessing. The pen was heavy and shaped like a bullet. I tried writing with it, but it never felt good in my hand. And by the time he died, the ink had run dry. "You are the family historian," he said when he gave it to me. "You'll write the story." The problem was, I never knew what story I was supposed to write. The headlines were factual and incendiary. It was a riveting tale, a disgraced educator and a corrupt former cop, both accused of conflict of interest, theft of taxpayer dollars, fraudulent real estate schemes, and destruction of evidence. For months, the Philadelphia Inquirer ran stories accompanied by unflattering photographs and graphics that detailed the illicit flow of funds between the school and my father's various business entities. But the sympathy cards that flooded the mailbox in the weeks after my father's death told a different story. I knew many of the signatories. The letters came from bereaved faculty, staff, parents, and students. I arranged the cards on the sideboard in the dining room, studying the messages of thanks and contrition. Some went on for pages. Quote, I don't care what anyone says. Brian Gardner helped our son when no one else would. Feel we've lost a great man. End quote. I wanted to write back, but I didn't know how to reply. In order to understand how far my father had fallen, you have to understand who he had been. Prior to the media revelations, legal review, and federal inquest, my father was one of the most respected educators in the city of Philadelphia. His experience in special education went all the way back to 1971, when he was working for Park. They filed a lawsuit against the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and the result was the first rights education decision in the nation, mandating free public education for all children with intellectual disabilities, and laying the groundwork for the Federal Education for All Handicapped Children Act of 1975. He then worked for over 20 years in the public school system as a regional special education supervisor and school principal before joining the front lines of the charter school movement. He had founded 2 successful charter schools and was preparing to break ground on a third. He was in the process of developing the city's first cyber school and had consulted with other founders on countless charters across the city and state. Everyone in the movement knew him. He was collaborating with the superintendent on district-wide projects and talking to politicians about national policy. So for many of his colleagues, the media revelations were devastating, almost unthinkable. Initially, I think people wanted to believe the accusations were false, but a legal audit by the firm Ballard and Spahr definitively concluded that my father had violated his fiduciary duties to PACS, and in so doing had jeopardized PACS's ability to fund capital projects and educational programming initiatives. In a well-documented 60-page report, legal auditors outlined brazen conspiracies and top-to-bottom corruption. I've read the report dozens of times over the years, and I'm still shocked by the bold terms and big numbers of my father's consulting contracts, one of which stipulated he would earn $94,000 for no more than 90 days of work per year and receive annual wage increases through 2016. The report also detailed a fraudulent real estate scheme by which my father used a shell nonprofit to siphon $66,000 a month from the school. The report detailed an unauthorized $70,000 interest-free loan from the school to one of his business ventures, the construction of lavish executive offices, and almost $1 million in missing funds. It explains that he exploited the school's maintenance team for personal projects and submitted outrageous expense reports. It's shameful to look at, painful to accept. The legal team noted that, quote, Gardner's conduct is particularly surprising and disappointing in light of the profound trust that the Philadelphia Academy Charter School faculty, staff, parents, and students placed in him as PAC's founder and a leader in the charter school community. The findings of the report were very clear, but his influence was so strong that to this day, some members of the community still hold to his vision. In September, I interviewed a member of the school's founding faculty who asked to remain anonymous. And I was surprised when in the first moments of our conversation, she characterized my father as an amazing man and a visionary. He would see it, she explained, and we would do it. You have to remember, she said of my father, that the school was his. It was his great labor. She described how my father dedicated his life to building the school, and she explicitly hearkened back to the op-ed. She recalled that my father had said that when everything comes out, you'll realize that I didn't build the school just to steal from it. Her voice broke when she said, I don't think he ever got that chance. The op-ed continues, quote, when I met Gardner more than a decade ago, he was still the principal of Farrell Elementary School in Ronhurst. and my son was part of a revolutionary class there for children with Asperger's syndrome, a form of autism. The class was a lifeline for my son, who didn't really seem to fit into any situation at school. But when my son finished his third and final year in the program, we were faced with a dilemma. The school district had no suitable placement for him, and neither did the parochial system. With September looming, we turned again to Gardner, then CEO of the new Philadelphia Academy Charter School, and Gardner listened to our plea. We marked the months anxiously before he called to tell me that he had an opening for our son, and it was one of the happiest days of our lives. I too vividly remember the excitement surrounding the birth of the Philadelphia Academy Charter School. I was a junior in high school when my father first started collecting signatures and traveling to meetings at the state offices in Harrisburg. And by the time I graduated from high school, he had started a revolution and staged a coup. He found investors, got government grants, and converted a warehouse behind a shopping center on Roosevelt Boulevard into a school building, complete with a gym, cafeteria, technology labs, playing fields, and dozens of windowless classrooms. The Philadelphia Academy was an amazing experiment with a noble mission to provide exceptional academics while simultaneously creating a fully integrated educational model for neurodiverse children. Students with disabilities would be mainstreamed into general education classrooms as much as possible, and every child would get their needs met, regardless of whether a student was high-achieving, non-speaking, or twice exceptional. Guided by the principle that everyone is capable of learning, PACS created educational spaces where children with disabilities would be integrated into the social fabric of the school, thus paving the way for broader societal integration and cultural change. The teacher I spoke with asserted that she had never seen anything like it before, and to this day she has never seen an institution do special education better than PACS. About 1/3 of the PACS student population had a documented disability. Some had relatively low support needs, while others had physical limitations. The terms of the charter stipulated that the city and state would pay almost double for each student with an individualized education plan. So, bottom line was that disability was good for business. These were the earliest days of the charter school movement, and people were excited about freedom, possibility, and promise. Here, teachers would have creative agency over their pedagogy. Parents would have choice over where their children went to school and a voice in the process. PACS provided hope and resources to parents and students in need. It was a labor of love, and the Philadelphia Academy Charter School was a family. My father was the literal founder and the symbolic father. He had a way of making people feel seen, heard, and understood. He listened more than he spoke and looked you in the eye. He had a nice speaking voice, deep and smooth, and he was exceptionally good with names. He knew every student's first and last name. He knew their mother's name, their father's name, who their cousins were, and how everyone connected in the social fabric of the community. If a student was in the hospital, he visited. If there was a death, he attended the funeral. He made people feel like they mattered. When I was growing up, people always said that I took after him. I was also good with names, and I didn't shy from looking strangers in the eye. My father had an inimitable way about him. People believed him. He had a credible, forceful demeanor and gave clear directions. So people trusted him to make good decisions. That's why the revelations came as such a blow, such a betrayal. Toward the end of our interview, the faculty member told me, "Your father made mistakes, but we can't forget him for who he was." In her estimation, his biggest mistake was trusting Kevin O'Shea. Kevin was a former Philadelphia police detective who quickly rose through the ranks at PACS. He was promoted from parent volunteer to director of facilities to CEO, and an emergency vote that was pushed through the board. No one could understand it because Kevin had no formal training or background in education and was, by all accounts, a bully who intimidated and belittled the staff. Your father didn't like to be mean to people, she told me. That other person delighted in it. When my father went down, Kevin went with him, eventually pleading guilty to viscerally offensive crimes like pocketing lunch money, vending machine proceeds, and donations for Toys for Tots. The charter report describes O'Shea's fraudulent behavior and abuse of his position as pervasive. Basically, nobody liked Kevin, and the language of the report does little to mask its author's disdain for him, stating that O'Shea plainly intended to extract unwarranted respect while cheating the PAC's community. But even then, no one could have predicted that O'Shea would have engaged in fraudulent behavior to the extent described herein. The teacher I spoke to speculated that perhaps my father was outwitted by Kevin and naive to his real motives. She said, Kevin had a lot of things set up to make it look like Brian had taken all this money. I think there were a lot of things that Kevin did to make Brian look more guilty than he was. I recently shared this theory with my stepbrother Christian, who was a special education student in my father's schools from the time he was 7 years old until he aged out at 21. When I asked him if he thought that Kevin might have been calling the shots all along, he got quiet a moment. No, he said finally. Dad was the boss of the whole school. A long silence settled between us before he said, and it's about time the truth came out. This is how the op-ed concludes. From third grade until my son's graduation and eventual move to the Philadelphia Academy Charter High School, Gardner helped him through many difficulties and celebrated his successes. He also welcomed our daughter, who also has disabilities, into the school's fold and immediately took an interest in her progress. Like many other parents, we were shocked at the allegations against O'Shea and particularly Gardner. It didn't seem like the right ending to a story about a man who did so much to promote the education of children who often fall through cracks in the system. As the stories about missing funds and abuse of power continued to leak out, I continued to wait for Gardner to explain what had happened, to give me that promised piece of truth. Now, I guess, I'll always be waiting. Conclusions. I too feel like I've always been waiting. My whole life I've been biting my tongue and biding my time, trying to find the right words. I feel like I've always been writing this story. Even before the first media revelations, when I was a graduate student. During that time, I fell into a prolonged period of insomnia. I had a desk in a small office in the literary arts department at Brown University, and I would often go there at midnight. Sometimes the night janitor would be there quietly vacuuming in the lobby, but I always had the third floor to myself. I would close the door and open my notebook, look out over the rooftops and down at the page. During those long nights, I wrote as if in a trance. I didn't know what I was writing. I just watched as the words spilled incoherently onto the page. I would then type up and print out my puzzling notes, underline interesting phrases and images, and rearrange the fractured pieces into lines. The result was a collection of tight, weaponized poems full of oblique references to my father, a handgun, a sense of dread, money, and impenetrable mystery. It's been 13 years since my father died, and I haven't managed to write my way out of the story, to find my way through to the end. The facts may be a matter of public record, but there's no such thing as a true story. The truth isn't one thing or another. It's not black or white. It's a third unsayable thing. The truth is always and only a poem.